The second day of Ivrovi, Crex Day, god of life, death, and fate, bringer of gentle passings and new beginnings.
We may not have to dump the bodies after all. I have an idea.
Tom started sliding his clothes back on, gesturing for Pat Theory to do the same. Pat Theory surveyed the scene. The smoke and flame in the distance turned the darkest of night into something like a sunrise.
If you can get us out of this...
Watch! The human flashed one of his irritating grins.
Take us back to the dock. We need to get there before the cops.
Pat Theory obliged, and before the boat even stopped, Tom was tossing bodies down on the dock beside their weapons.
Cover story. We showed up to look into purchasing a slip. If anyone asks why we came after dark, it's because Gelf is prejudiced against aliens. Got it? After midnight? Of course we did. And why would I be here? An unmarried woman with an old and married man? Hey, older, not old. Tom paused. We could probably explain the hakach thing as an adult mentor thing. Anyways, we spot two suspicious individuals, follow, see what they did right before they shoot each other. Tom mimed blowing away an imaginary body. Then everything started blowing up before we could call the constables. We're totally innocent bystanders. He scooped up some dust and smidged over his clothes. I am not covering myself in dirt. You dived in the water to get away from the fires, Tom shrugged, looking pleased with the idea. Pat Theory scowled down at the bits of seaweed stuck to her pelt. Honestly, officer, they must have been terrorists. Had a falling out or something. This seems unlikely to cover up the robbery. Hey, we don't know anything about any robbery. Besides, they'll be too busy looking at the bodies and the explosions to notice a robbery. The fires were still blazing merrily along the dock, while something collapsed in the clubhouse, sending a shower of embers into the sky. She could hear the wail of sirens out in the distance. Trust me, Tom said confidently. Weirder things have happened. Hannah couldn't help noticing the irony. Today was Crex Day, the day of fates. Talking to Dad had turned into a long talk with Mum. Dad had Eli to deal with, and last night he and Levi had gone off to corner the doofus in his bedroom. Not that her announcement went without comment. Dad had passed her off to Mum. Mum dealt with problems a whole different way from Dad. There were no homespun stories leading you where he wanted to go. Mum asked questions and just listened. She was good about questions, but where Dad handed conversations like one of his favourite Garrison Keillor books, Mum just listened, asked questions, and didn't offer much. That always made Mum harder. With Dad you had time to think, even if you weren't always sure where he was going. Mum put you on the spot and left you there. Maybe she should have gone to see Eli. But that wasn't the point, and Hannah made herself clear. No, this wasn't a problem. It was her choice. It wasn't forever. The odds were it would bring her back to Earth after training. Yes, since the firm was interested in humans, so that's where they needed her. Besides, it was just an interview. She might not even get the job. She tried to tell herself that all morning before calling Jalissa Tandala. She of the amazing trenchcoat had picked up the call on the third ring, and one alarmingly short conversation later sent a car by. It seemed their management had a lot going on. There was a pressing need if she had the time. Yes, they wanted to see her, and since she was on a short vacation, why, right now was just fine. That made it time to put up or shut up. She talked to Melody and Riala that morning, of course. They needed her help on the farm, taking care of the accounts, but were good about it. Everything was sorted and there weren't any messes to clean up. She'd seen to that, but it was going so smoothly they could get someone to step in. Melody was very understanding, and Riala was her usual bouncy self. They were both excited for her. The interview itself was odd. She had expected questions, but not the weird version of a Rorschach test, much less running around a jogging track. Then, more questions, most of which made no sense, contradicted each other, or got very explicit. She wasn't a prude, but at the end of it all, she felt like the Shilvanti man who talked to her had turned her upside down and shaken her to see what fell out. The tide pool was interesting. She'd been sitting in a very nice side room with Jalissa and trying to clear the fog from her brain, trying to decide if the drink was helping or not. The purple concoction was like someone wrapped a slice of lemon around a gold brick before smashing it into her forehead, but it was pretty tasty. At least they weren't keeping her waiting. Whatever arcane spell their PR witches cast over her test results, at least the magic acted fast. Jalissa had promised she wasn't leaving today wondering if they'd call or not. She'd finished the first drink and was actually considering a second when Jalissa held up her hand and bit her lip as she took a call, said a few brief words and hung up.
Okay, Pinky, you're in. That is, if you still want to. Once you're in, there's no exit for a while, so what's it gonna be? I'm gonna be a spy?
Well, if she said yes. If she said no, then at least now she could say she turned down the job, instead of not being offered. That was a whole different thing. Her choice. Eli would probably... no, definitely make some stupid remark, but he could go suck it. She would know, and that was enough. Then it would be back home with Mum and Dad, helping around the house, keeping the accounts for Mel and Ree, Sunday dinners, maybe getting asked out for a date to the Garden of Eden. The same old routine, and she did love it. Love them all. Even the jackass, when he wasn't being a total jackass. Back to her normal life, where spies were hot blondes like Charlize Theron, or guys in sharp suits like Paul Mescal's James Bond. It meant going back to being a normal girl with boring brown hair and helping Mrs. Sackler set up the Journey of Wheat presentation at the State Fair. Jalissa sipped her crusher and cocked her head to one side, looking cool. She hadn't even laughed when Hannah gagged on her first sip. What the hell was in a cortical crusher anyway? And why would she, Hannah McClendon, be a spy? Long hours in the dead of night, prying out people's secrets, running in the shadows, danger at every turn, and the training. Hard exercise, honing her body and mind every day, and nights living it up in the galaxy's most notorious nightclub. Well, mostly nightclub, where the waiters got diamonds in their glass and swept emeralds away with the junk. Learning how to rub elbows, just elbows, with the moves and shakers of the whole galaxy. Did they even know about strip poker? The hell with Baccarat? How cool would that be?
The name's McClendon. Hannah McClendon. Oh God, I'm gonna love being a spy.
Hannah reached for a refill.
Sign me up, put me down, and hand me your trench coat. It's too bad we don't get to wear a fancy uniform with lots of ribbons and gold down the sleeves. Jalissa shrugged, leaning back in her chair. But it would sort of defeat the purpose. Cheers, girlfriend.
Hannah reached out and touched her glass to Jalissa's.
This looks like the start of a beautiful friendship.
Priscilla stared at her on the pad. Another text message from Belder.
She'll keep calling me. She'll keep calling me until I call back. She'll make me feel guilty. This is ridiculous.
Not that her efforts to dig into the foreclosure on Belder's family had met any success as yet. Another day in this office as her three companions dove into their deathmatch of Galaxy Conquest Marines, instead of doing anything useful.
Fine. I'll call. Shit.
Good day, ladies. And who is winning as of the moment? A portly woman with swept-back ebony hair strode into the offices of the Legal Pioneers and looked about expectantly. Her suit was grey, woven of the rough woolen fabric that seemed fashionable on Willist, neat and fastidious, and her words, while slow, were clear, as if she were making each one count.
And who, precisely, is this?
Vonda Ulrian, dropped her on the pad and shot up from her desk.
Precisely the same, Miss Kanshri, the intern from Avaturn?
Indeed. Well, Mr. Sane, come with me, and let's see what is to be made of you.
And so she did. Kangshri's chambers were like the woman herself. Tidy. Everything was there, yet nothing was out of place. The furnishings were rich yet comfortable. Simple and not ornate. Direct. Just like their owner.
Now then, Mr. Sane, tell me what your principal interests are within the law.
Pris smiled, fitting herself in surer waters. Contracts were her real love, but that wouldn't do for her purpose. Property law, she said earnestly.
Then the mystery of your appointment to Willist, whilst unbeknown to myself, is no longer left in the shadows.
Kangshri settled into her chair, folding her hands over her stomach.
There is relatively little casework in our world. It is not a litigious planet, and most of the casework here revolves around property issues. As such, you will find something to occupy your time than playing Galaxy Quest, entertaining as that may be.
Kangshri's tone made even statements sound as if they might be questions, and Pris found herself taken by the woman. Creating an impression made a difference in court, as long as it was the right one. Kangshri created the impression of a rogue wave bearing down on you, solid and inexorable like her speech.
We have one property case on the docket at the moment. A repossession of lands in the service of Imperial interests. Recount the facts for me now.
I haven't seen the case, ma'am. I only just met your clerks outside, and
The law is best when tempered with mercy, but it is forged in impartiality. If you cannot recount the facts of a case when standing before a magistrate, you will find very little mercy there. Nor should you. A court of law has only one aim, that is to be apolitical. A servant of the people without agenda. It is a realm of facts of which you are lacking.
What happens when those serving the law fall short?
Pris had meant the comment to be casual, to carry on a conversation. The woman rounded on her slowly, and she had the impression of being targeted by a large gun turret wrapped in tweed. Kangshri gave her a wintry look, assessing her.
Servants of the law can and will fall short. That is because justice is an objective that is ever out of reach. A goal reached for in perpetuity. Anything less would render it a mediocrity, or worse, an impediment to the social covenant. She drew a long breath and picked up her omnipad meaningfully. Pris took up her own and saw the file register as it was swiped over. Do not darken my chamber until you have familiarized yourself with the facts, Mr. Sane. Good day.
Vadim plucked his favourite red shirt from the shrinking pile of laundry and folded it neatly. He packed enough to stay at the Pelivan house for the duration of Ivrovi, but was just now realizing how much of his wardrobe was black. Black was fine. It was a good colour for work in the restaurant. If something spilled, it didn't show so visibly. But he wasn't wearing black these days outside the restaurant. Well, not as much, and that meant more washing, and Melody's children already needed some done. Thankfully, the house was stocked with everything he needed. It was a lovely place, and he tried to imagine Shalea Pelivan living there all alone, while Lady Miver and Tom were off at the academy. It seemed lonely. On the other hand, 13 people were filling the house to the seams. He needed to do laundry, and with Lady Dasari taking everyone on another outing, it was a good day to clean up. He had no intention of leaving a mess, and a little cleaning every day would keep it from being a chore. He just hadn't expected to enjoy the company as much as he was. Vadim had never considered himself big on boy talk. He didn't have many friends his age out in town, practically growing up in one kitchen or another. It was like a family, particularly once his father started taking on a regular crew. Conversation tended to get direct, and he'd grown up with more of an education than most boys, though his father would have been enough for that. Still, he hadn't expected Melody McClendon to be so engaging. The human girl, well, woman really, had stayed home. Today was her day to watch Cassandra and Joshua, and while he'd worried that talking to her might be awkward, it had proven anything but. Between keeping her children occupied, she'd pitched in to clean, helped fold the laundry, and their conversation had been nice. Very nice. He'd liked Melody. He certainly never expected her to be so boyish, but they'd whiled away Craig's day over cups of tea. At least, until she cocked her head, looking at him out of the corner of her eye.
So, what's this about you and Solana?
Nothing. No, really. He'd found that he'd grown used to the human's odd colour palette, which was just as well because he started to blush. It's flattering, but right now I'm focused on Melondi. Someday there might be more wives, but Melondi's enough for me to be thinking about.
She is lovely, isn't she? Rhea and I enjoy speaking with her so much, and we're terribly sorry Eli upset her.
Melody flushed pink, and he smiled at their shared embarrassment. He knew he blushed when she turned to him with a worried expression.
I was kind of hoping you'd explain what happened.
It's complicated. He shook his head. If only she knew. People took the Empress seriously, and he had to wonder how Melondi felt every time she heard someone swear by the Empress's tits. Very devout or prissy people did take real offense to swearing by the Empress, but most? It was the sort of thing that just happened. The Academy girls didn't, but they also knew whose mother they were swearing by.
It usually is.
She nodded and sighed.
Just let her know we're sorry it spoiled the evening, Eli's mouth is not his friend sometimes.
I noticed last night at the stadium, Vadim bit out, and he shook his head. I'm sorry. That came out more tardily than I wanted it to. He isn't like any other boys I've ever met.
Still, it's a shame Melondi couldn't join us for the address. Family obligations during the holidays are understandable, though.
Melody smiled, sipping her tea.
Have you met her family, then?
I haven't had the chance yet. Vadim felt himself blushing again, even though he was on firmer ground. We started seeing each other a few months ago, and, her family's been very busy.
It was nice to see her working with you at the restaurant. And don't let Solana fool you, her mother's all work. You just don't see it with them here on vacation.
She offered him a kind smile.
Frances wants to be a baroness, but she works hardest of them all.
Her honours will go to Trixis, though. Vadim took in Melody's nod of affirmation and refilled her cup. Solana seems very proud of her whole family. It's good to see how well they've done on Earth. She's very intent.
Solana? She's...
Melody paused, gazing up at the ceiling with a bemused smile.
Well, she didn't exactly have a normal Shovanti girl's childhood growing up on Earth. She's sort of burned both ends of the candle.
She gave him a diffident grin.
I'm guessing you don't know what that means. I had to explain so much to Riala.
As expressions go, that seems pretty clear.
Vadim shook his head. Solana had gotten a lot less handsy, but she was still circling, and he'd felt her eyes on him.
You learn to duck and dodge as a waiter, but together at home? It was going to be a long FOV. His on-the-pad pinged, and he glanced down with a sigh. He reached down and swiped accept.
The restaurant? Melody asked, giving him a sympathetic smile. Don't let me keep you. I appreciate you keeping me company, though.
Oh, no, I just have to go by the fertility clinic. It's mandatory for men before your 12th birthday, and... Vadim watched as Melody turned an alarming shade of scarlet. Are you alright?
You mean you have to...
You... donate? He blinked. Every man does. It's just a once-in-a-lifetime thing. I just hadn't gotten it over with. He grinned impishly. It's nothing to be embarrassed about. Trust me, growing up with my father, there isn't much that could.
You make it sound like registering for the draft. That was a thing before the Imperium arrived. You did it at 18? Earth years.
Women did that? I'd heard Earth was pretty violent. Vadim shook his head.
Well, sometimes I wondered, especially after that thing with Mr. Warwick.
I heard about that.
Melody shook her head.
I know it's not like that. I mean, not these days. And no, it was men that registered.
Weird.
Vadim tried to wrap his head around the idea of such an upside-down world, but after everything else, it just fit. Humans.
But no, it's not something to be embarrassed about. Some women just don't find men, but they still want children. It just happens, and believe me, it's made things so much better. It's bad enough now to try going somewhere without an escort. I don't even want to think about how it used to be. My father, living as a single man, would never have happened back in the old days. People like me still look at me oddly when I explain I have a single father.
Trust me, I don't have to imagine, Melody sighed, folding another tiny shirt. Well, I can imagine the part about being unsafe when you're alone. Rihanna and I probably should have gone with Levi to the park the other day.
Melody nodded, staring into her tea.
But what I meant was having a single parent. I did too.
You had a single...
Vadim blinked, flipping things around. It was Earth, after all.
A single mother?
Father. My mom died when I was pretty young.
Melody nodded. Some of the light seemed to fade from her eyes.
It wasn't always easy, especially for my sister.
At least Levi wasn't carried off,
Vadim grinned, trying to lighten the mood.
Miss Solani did that.
Warwick's fiancé? You're kidding. Wait, no, I've seen her. Oh my god, you're not kidding.
I'm not,
Vadim giggled lightly, sharing Melody's bright peal of laughter.
So what about you and Levi and Riala? Is she planning on having children?
It's not something that's come up before, but we probably need to talk about it.
Melody was turning bright red again.
There's not much Ree won't talk about, and it's probably time we did. She's in a good mood before the holiday.
She was quiet for a moment, then shook herself.
I do hope Malandi can join us tomorrow. Drebner's Day is supposed to be a lot of fun. Comedies and festivals, and there's that big battle the girls are having tonight at Oringa Plaza. It all sounds very exciting.
She told me she wouldn't miss it, and it should be pretty intense, Vadim confided. I was never into esports, it's more of a girl thing, but GC Ultimate Tournament is very important. One match a night though, and all done by Plutaro's Day, so plenty of time during the day for all the festivals and parties.
Rihanna and Levi should have fun. They're more into gaming than I am.
Melody smiled down at the pile of socks, then perked up.
Say, is there any place to go dancing?
What will you wear for the wedding, then?
Melondi had asked the question which put Tom in the spot. On top of everything else, today of all days, his warden's uniform had to appear in the post. Every single girl in his class was back now, except for Belter and Priss. Nesfer had practically levitated through the door with news on how Rochade Publishing was going to handle things, while Lark had largely confirmed things with her network. The other girls had piled into their dorm rooms and the hotel to offer support after the disaster that masqueraded as a speech, to offer Mel their support. She thanked them all, took in their news, and now Melondi wanted to talk about anything else. Well, anything except dinner with the Desaris. Sephir had asked after Vadim cautiously, and Mel had taken a hard left at the conversation, asking if he could show them his uniform. Tom had seen the smirk on Miv and Leia's grin. Solani looked ready to burst at the seams as she nodded. The uniform of the Yeoman Wardens was traditional, historically accurate, and if you were a woman built like a linebacker, it was probably flattering. When you looked at a grizzled veteran of the Imperial Marines, the first sensible instinct was not to laugh. The whole kill you as soon as look at you aesthetic overcame any other impressions. Even what for all the world looked like a Morris dancer's costume, right down to the flowers and the hat. The only thing missing was pheasant feathers, and he wasn't about to ask. I hadn't thought about it. Tom set the vest back down, and the sea of women filling the living room gave each other significant looks. There were thoughtful smiles, mostly directed at Solani. Perched between Miv and Leia, she looked like the cat who was ready to eat the canary. This is not the time or place for this conversation. We discussed it, and I was thinking of my Air Force tux. Solani wants a traditional wedding for 4, and this time around I don't want 90 cameras filming, 80 exotic dancers, 70 women fainting, and a partridge in a pear tree. He spotted Zinshiki's sight curl into a second-degree question, and he sighed like Eeyore on a bad day. It's a bird. You eat it. She looked satisfied, but Melondi wasn't done.
Well, but why are you waiting, sir? You'll want to be here for it.
That met a general murmur of approval, and truth be told, he didn't have a good answer. With everything going on, there hasn't been time to discuss it. Lani will be back on active duty soon. Solani was watching him now, which was damned unfair. Miv's face took on a demure, accepting expression, while Leia's was more eloquent as she leaned back, arching her eyebrows. Don't blow this. Yeah, I get it. Tom looked back at Solani, who was happily eating this up. And why not? We're all on candid camera. When did he stop minding that? Being stabbed in the guts by a ceremonial dagger the size of a Bowie knife resolved a lot of personal privacy issues, but there were still times he was more aware of it than others, like now. Her whole pod is probably watching this. Don't blow it. Tom had the image of being up a tree and surrounded by a pride of hungry lionesses, while Marlin Perkins stood by. Zinshiki's more than casual interest didn't help. I know you have commitments, Lani, but did you have any thoughts? Tom tossed the question back into play. I mean, with your family not in Shill, if Rovi wouldn't give them any notice. My parents are a long way off, and kind of gave up hope on me getting married to anything except the Corps. Solani pulled her knees up to her chin, and her smile grew even wider. I wouldn't mind if you don't. Oh, big help. Several interesting revenge scenarios ran through his mind, but they were playful, not serious. The notion of getting it over with had some positives, all things considered. Aside from Bodin, Jama, and Monsignor Barcio, who did he really have to invite? Leia's mothers? Leia would handle her connections, and Miv would do the same with Garnia and her family. The notion of keeping it small had a lot going for it, and if Rovi would provide a world of cover. He drew in a breath and dove in. What's traditional? During if Rovi, I mean. Any day of the evening arch is good. Jaxby piped up, her smile almost as big as Solani's. Tom shot a look at his trinity on the couch, where Leia was trying not to snicker. The evening arch was made up of Jaraphel's Day, Shamatal's Day, and Killer's Day, which ostensibly celebrated joy, reverence, and healing, though according to Jama it was anticipation, revelry, and hangovers. Weddings were very popular during the first two, and occasionally compulsory on the third. Drafhel's is only 4 days off, Tom offered, as more of a statement than a question. The temples are very understanding, Lani said. Miv nodded ever so slightly. Bodin insisted on cooking and the restaurant will be packed, Tom pointed out, before adding that we can take an afternoon or evening off. He and Vadim need a break, and the place can run itself for a few hours. I'm sure that he wouldn't mind, Miv said confidently, particularly if he can say he caters to humans afterwards. He did that at the banquet, Tom muttered. I think he probably wants to forget the banquet, sir, Melondi offered with a grimace. Zinshiki's claws flexed, and the girls generally agreed. Considering how close a call the night had been, he couldn't disagree. The only visible scar had been to Bodin's reputation. The truth was that there wasn't any perfect day. Yes, Solani and her friends in the bunker would get a break over summer, when Melondi, Kalira, was back at the palace, but what did the future hold that far out? While Mel had been doing her best not to show worry, it came out now and then. She had no idea, and if the news reports were anything to go by, she had no reason to. Most had gone very quiet about the address, but one of the consortium networks in Shill had been candid. If Camordri was half as petty as Melondi hinted at, that was bad, and he wanted her safe. Wanted her there. Carpe diem. Tom closed his eyes as Marlin Perkins was ringing the dinner bell. What day would you prefer, ladies?
Draffel's Day,
Lani burst out. He opened his eyes and saw Lani gripping Miv and Leia's hands. Her new limb wouldn't be ready yet, but wedding pictures weren't really a thing with Shivanti. The Dasaris were still on the planet, but that was Badin's problem, and Mel probably wanted Badin to herself. There were details, but there were always details. The girls were already planning. What was the worst that could happen? Solani had already, quite literally, carried him off before. All he needed to do was tie a bow around his chest and show up, and there were enough of the damn things in the warden's uniform. Tom's on-the-pad rang, interrupting his thoughts, and he looked down at the caller ID. Zachariah McClendon. Tom sighed inwardly. It'd be nice to have other humans there. For Santino Barcio, it would probably be educational, but the McClendons were a nice couple. Levi and his wives were too. The Dasaris, well, they were Badin's family. Eli McClendon. With luck, no one heard Eli mouthing off at the address. Probably. Unless Zachariah was calling to ask if he knew any good lawyers. If the Interior had grabbed him, no barrister in the galaxy would get him out of where the Interior would send him, and Melondi blowing her cover was not going to happen. Not that the kid living out his days on Ice Planet Zebra made Tom particularly upset, if he had to be honest about it. But no, Mel wouldn't, which meant the kid was still around. Probably best to go with Draffel's Day. Doing the whole thing naked on Shamantal's Day just didn't bear thinking on. At all. Tom made his way toward one of the bedrooms for some privacy. Give me a minute, everyone. I have to get this. He was about to hit accept when a text message lit up from Lamana Davari. The middle of his school holiday, Tom had never expected to step foot in his office, much less meet Lorem Raylin. Melondi hadn't been forthcoming about the Minister of the Interior, and given how hard it was to have a word in private, he hadn't wanted to press. Enough of what he said passed by Lamana Davari as it was. And now I have both of them in my office. Joy. Not that Raylin wasn't polite. She was, to a fault, though finding her outside his office door had made a statement. He'd left it closed and locked. He'd found her waiting with it standing open. She'd been sitting inside, nursing a cup of tea from the cafe on the Commons, and waited to be invited in. The message was clear. Your boundaries are not mine, but I'll be gracious as long as you are. Normal rules need not apply, Tom thought as he offered her a seat. She took it. Davari stood, her airy persona as a music teacher already vanished. Now then, Minister. Special Agent Davari said you needed to see me, but she didn't elaborate? Davari hadn't said a damn thing, though her message alone had put him off his stride. He probably hadn't been his best with Zach McClendon. The guy was apologizing about his son, asking how Melondi was and if there was anything they could do to make it right. All the right things to say, and he hoped he'd mouth the right things back. At the time, Tom's mind had definitely been on other matters. When he'd called Davari back, and she explained the minister wanted a word at his earliest convenience, which would be in 20 minutes at his office, Marlin Perkins had tossed him an elephant gun and ran for the hills. There was even a little smoke trail that would have done Wile E. Coyote proud.
I appreciate you seeing me, Professor, and without your wives as well. How avant-garde. I wouldn't have blamed you if you'd asked Miver along, or perhaps Captain Tonnis, but I appreciate the chance to speak with discretion, as my time is limited.
She gestured over to Lamana with her cup.
Special Agent Davari will reciprocate, of course. Professor Thomas Warwick, currently a professor of history, English, and apparently marriage fundamentals. Recently assigned to the MOTC as an elective and accepted into the position of Captain of the Yeoman Wardens. How does the uniform fit, by the way?
Rayling cocked her head to the right, her smile bemused.
I could recite your personal background at some length, but it's your proximity to Princess Kalira and your activities directly after the incorporation of Earth into the Imperium which concerns me.
Tom hadn't known what to expect from this interview. In his own office, he hadn't expected an interrogation. Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition. Tom found no humour at all in the thought.
You haven't said much, Mr. Warwick.
Raylan took a small sip from her tea.
Are you so content as a professor that your lips are sealed, or do you simply not want to discuss your history as a terrorist?
Tom pursed his lips and gave her a moo. Ever seen The Princess Bride?
By your context, I presume that's a title. Ah, yes, a book by William Goldman, Earth date 1973, adapted to a film 1987.
She canted her head ever so slightly.
You have a particular reference in mind?
Tom's mouth hung open. The answer wasn't a confirmation that she'd seen it. It was her immediate recall of the facts to answer the question, and she'd had them to hand in an instant. The implications were chilling. He closed his mouth. Actually, yes. You keep using that word. I do not think it means what you think it means. In this case, the word is terrorist.
Indeed.
Raylan cocked her head fractionally more.
Do not stop there. Please, enlighten me.
The word is so broad in its usual application that it's two-faced. One person's terrorist is another person's freedom fighter. Asymmetrical warfare. That sort of thing. And in a world where your entire family is killed and you learn of people being used for medical experiments, issues would be nonsensical. In for a penny? Hypothetically, let's examine the facts. Tom looked for anything on the minister's face and wasn't disappointed by her flash of amusement. He was uncertain how useful it was or how much he knew, but he knew he wasn't getting out of this by hedging. In the days after the Imperium established control, there was a lot of uncertainty by everyone on what was happening and how to deal with it. In that time of uncertainty, certain Imperial parties took advantage. Now, you may regard me as just a man, and if I wasn't aware of just how men fit in the Imperial military before, recent experiences are curing my illusions. He held up a hand when Raylan looked ready to interject. She examined it like a novelty. I was a soldier, and soldiers are part of an institution. On the other hand, certain Imperial parties were not. I know the reaction in Indiana was fierce, but as far as I am concerned, no military personnel ever needed to be afraid of me during that period of uncertainty. Tom felt the weight of the years. He'd been younger then. He remembered the anger. There had never been hate. Scalpels didn't hate. As for certain Imperial parties, once the Imperium resolved their activities, so did most of the resistance. In human experience, invaders aren't usually that considerate. I never had any illusions that the Imperium was going to leave Earth. Once the true scope of Imperial power became clear, the idea was laughable. But the context of our place within the Imperium, that's another matter. The purpose was never to liberate humanity. It wasn't even about revenge. It was to maintain our self-respect as best we could until the Imperium respected us. Hypothetically.
And when did that happen?
Hypothetically, of course. When the Imperium stopped invading and started governing. Which, to be fair, the Imperium did better than my country ever managed. Are you familiar with Oxy Day? There was that uncanny moment of delay, and Tom began to realize what he was facing. Depending on what Loren Raylan decided, he was well and truly up shit creek.
No Day, celebrating the rejection of Italian demands by the Greeks in 1940. Forgive me if I'm blunt, but the Earth possessed a multiplicity of governments and an excess of nuclear weapons. A determination was made that a negotiated entry into the Imperium would be prolonged at best, and possibly result in several rather nasty wars destructive to your world. At that point, saying no was never an option.
In 1974, there was a military dictatorship in Greece. On Oxy Day that year, the Greek people wanted the dictatorship out. They marched on the capital, straight to the American embassy. Not on their government, the Americans. 1 week later, the dictatorship was out, followed shortly by regime changes in Turkey. American military bases in Greece became American bases in Turkey. Are you familiar with Operation Ajax? Raylin blinked, but Tom had the impression there was nothing behind it. Whatever allowed her such uncanny recall, she was used to it.
Our records on Earth are significant, but not complete.
The 1953 operation by the CIA and MI6 to overthrow the democratically elected government in Iran after the election of an individual bent on nationalizing Iran's petroleum assets. Tom sighed. So much history boiled into a few succinct words, doing it all so little justice. The coup fictitiously painted the Prime Minister as a religious extremist, and the overthrow was considered successful at the time, as the monarchy was restored, and US and British interests were given a 40% ownership of all Iranian oil interests. The Shah remained in power until 1979, when, in a surge of irony, religious extremists actually did take over the government.
Humans have an enduring tradition of monarchy.
The woman settled back, sipping her drink.
Your democratic institutions acting more like popularity contests than meritocracies.
The Iranians remained pissed off at the West for the next 40 years, Tom said, not acknowledging her remark. It was insightful in a way that had uncomfortably little to do with instant recall, and he didn't want to go down that rabbit hole.
You appear unhesitant to sympathize, Mr. Warwick. As you said, one person's terrorist. But I believe that's the origin of your nation's own revolution.
Raylin's words cut through the silence.
I take it you lump the CIA and MI6 together with certain imperial interests. It would be prudent to set that behind you. So few things are what they appear, and you don't seem a rash man, but such unfashionable sentiments could be troublesome.
Far be it from me to fall out of fashion, Tom said coolly. I loved my country, Minister, but it didn't always live up to its promises. I didn't agree when it did some Turok shit out of national interests, and sometimes you had to clean the stable. People might have had to hold their nose and nobody liked the job, but you couldn't ignore it. The prospect of life in prison lurked in his mind, and Tom chose his next words with care. I happen to think a nation is stronger when it faces reality.
You have very direct views on the issue of truth, Professor Warwick. But if I stood up and turned around, would you tell me if my attire made me look fat?
Raylin leaned forward slightly.
I deal with a world of lies, Professor, and not all honesty is equally virtuous.
Tom wanted to lick his lips, but he didn't, using the moment to consider his options and get a sense of their conversation. I take your point.
And the Imperium, Professor.
Raylin leaned forward a bit more, pressing the point.
Hypothetically, of course.
It's successfully governing a mind-bogglingly large portion of the galaxy. As for Earth, our United Nations was never a federal institution. We had global problems and no global government, Tom said candidly. The Imperium is governing Earth far better than we did. Not perfectly, but far better.
And the Turok shit?
Raylin studied him, with the hint of a smile.
Your interviews on Meet the Imperium suggest you want rather more.
The Imperium is investing in Earth, not strip mining it. I have some occasional qualms about cultural appropriation, but they've grown few and far between. I prefer we were lusted after rather than feared or reviled.
As the sex planet?
She asked, her voice amused. Tom grimaced. Lusted after politely.
I think you make a rather good professor. I trust you'll continue to do so.
Raylin set aside her glass and stood.
Thank you for your time. I'll show myself out.
Is that it? Tom asked, flustered by the abrupt change.
I also think you'll look adorable in the warden's uniform. Your fiancé should especially love it.
Raelin was already halfway to the door when she paused and winked.
Lamanna, be a dear and don't tell my husband.
Raelin left the door open, leaving Tom with Lamanna Davari. His expression carefully neutral, he slowly turned to look her squarely in the eye. And do you have any questions, Professor Davari? Davari looked at him unflinchingly, studying him without a word. After a moment, she left, closing the door behind her.